Okay, get this. In 1880, Pierre Curie discovered that squeezing a quartz crystal creates electricity. Fast forward to today, that weird crystal magic is literally powering your smartphone, watch, and computer right now. Mind blown yet? Because we're just getting started. Hey there, truth seekers. Welcome back to the Hidden Academy, where we don't just repeat history, we decode it. I'm your host, and today we're tackling something that's either dismissed as complete new age nonsense or hyped as miracle healing rocks, crystals. Look, I was a total skeptic too. I used to roll my eyes at crystal shops faster than you can say overpriced quartz. That is, until I stumbled across declassified research from the Soviet Union's psychic warfare program that detailed their extensive crystal experiments. Yeah, that's a real thing that happened. Here's what's crazy. Virtually every advanced ancient civilization became obsessed with specific crystals. The Egyptians buried pharaohs with massive quartz crystals aligned to specific constellations. Mayans carved skulls from single pieces of quartz that modern optical engineers still can't fully explain. Ancient Chinese emperors were buried in jade suits because they believed jade preserved consciousness after death. Were all these advanced civilizations the same people who built pyramids with astronomical precision and tracked star movements over centuries? Just superstitious crystal lovers? Or did they understand something that we're only rediscovering through quantum physics and material science? I mean, think about it. We now use crystals for laser technology, precise timekeeping, data storage, and even medical ultrasound devices. The technology that powers our modern world relies on properties of crystals that would have seemed like actual magic just 150 years ago. In today's deep dive, we're connecting dots across time, from ancient crystal technologies to cutting-edge science. We'll explore exactly how crystals interact with energy, consciousness, and potentially even quantum fields. And wait till you hear about the Pentagon's classified research into crystal-based communication systems that supposedly couldn't be hacked or jammed, stuff that never made it to the public. So whether you sleep with amethyst under your pillow or think crystal healing belongs in the same category as flat earth theories, I'm asking you to hit pause on those judgments for the next 20 minutes. The truth, as always, is way more fascinating than either extreme. Ready to have your mind legitimately blown about these ancient rocks? Let's go. Let's set the record straight on something. Crystal use wasn't just some fringe practice in ancient times. We're talking about technologies and applications that were central to the most advanced civilizations in history. Take ancient Egypt. In the tomb of Tutankhamun, archaeologists found crystal scarabs and wands precisely positioned on the pharaoh's body at specific energy points, exactly where modern acupuncturists would place needles. Coincidence? The ancient Egyptian medical papyri actually included instructions for using different crystals to treat specific ailments. But here's where it gets wild. Analysis of these artifacts shows they weren't just grabbing any pretty rocks. They specifically selected materials with high piezoelectric and paramagnetic properties. That's not random crystal collecting. That's applied materials science. The ancient Chinese didn't just value jade for its beauty. Imperial records from 2,500 years ago describe using crystal-tipped needles to redirect what they called qi energy in the body. They categorized crystals based on their effects on human energy fields centuries before we had any instruments to measure bioelectromagnetics. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. Different cultures just like shiny rocks. But that doesn't explain why these civilizations, separated by oceans and developing independently, all arrived at nearly identical conclusions about which specific crystals had which specific properties. The Mayans created crystal skulls with optical properties that still baffle modern scientists. These skulls, carved from single pieces of quartz, exhibit unusual optical effects, including the ability to channel light in unexpected ways. Mitchell Hedges' skull, discovered in 1924, has optical properties so precise that modern experts initially suggested it must have been created with advanced technology. The ancient Greeks documented the electromagnetic properties of lodestone and amber crystals. Thales of Miletus wrote about their ability to attract objects around 600 BCE. That's the earliest documented observation of electromagnetic properties in human history. What's really fascinating is that these weren't just spiritual objects. They were practical technologies. The Vikings used crystalline stones like Iceland spar, optical calcite, for navigation at sea. These sunstones could locate the position of the sun on cloudy days by polarizing light, a property only recently confirmed by modern physics. The ancient Sanskrit text of India describes something called Vaidurya, crystalline materials said to store and transmit both light and information. Sound familiar? We call them fiber optics now, and they're the backbone of the internet. Even relatively isolated cultures like the Australian Aboriginals use specific crystals in shamanic practices, believing they could communicate across vast distances through these stones. Interestingly, many of the crystals they selected, like clear quartz and selenite, are the exact same materials we now use for communication technology. But here's the million-dollar question. How did all these ancient cultures independently discover the same properties in the same crystals? More importantly, why did these discoveries largely disappear from Western knowledge for over 1,000 years? The answer might surprise you. When Christianity became Rome's official religion, Emperor Theodosius ordered the destruction of the ancient Library of Alexandria in 391 CE, which housed much of the ancient world's crystal knowledge. Later, during medieval witch hunts, anyone found with healing crystals could be executed for witchcraft. What we're seeing isn't the absence of crystal science. We're seeing the deliberate suppression of it. By the time the scientific revolution rolled around in the 16th and 17th centuries, crystal knowledge had been effectively purged from European consciousness. Western science had to start from scratch, rediscovering properties that ancient civilizations had already mapped out thousands of years earlier. But here's where things get really interesting. How modern scientific discoveries are finally catching up to what ancient civilizations somehow already knew. And that's where this story gets even weirder. So what exactly is happening in these rocks at a molecular level that made them so valuable to ancient civilizations? And why is modern science suddenly catching up? Let's start with the basics. Crystals aren't just pretty rocks. They're highly organized molecular structures. Unlike most solids where atoms are arranged randomly, crystals have atoms arranged in precise, repeating three-dimensional patterns called lattices. This isn't just a cool fact. It's the key to everything that follows. First up, piezoelectricity. This is the ability of certain crystals to generate an electrical charge when mechanical pressure is applied. Quartz is the poster child for this property. When you squeeze it, electrons actually move through the crystal structure, creating a measurable electrical voltage. The reverse is also true. Apply electricity to these same crystals, and they physically change shape. That's wild when you think about it. A solid object that moves when electricity flows through it. This isn't fringe science. It's how your quartz watch keeps time, how speakers and microphones work, and how ultrasound imaging helps doctors see inside your body. But here's where it gets more interesting. In 1982, scientists discovered something called the bioelectric effect. Certain crystals, particularly those used by ancient healers, can affect the electrical properties of biological tissues. When specific crystals are placed near living cells, they can influence the electrical potentials across cell membranes. Think I'm heading into new age territory? This research was published in the Journal of Biological Physics and is used in modern medical devices that accelerate bone healing for fracture patients. Then there's the semiconductor effect. Certain crystals allow electrical current to flow through them under specific conditions. Silicon, a crystalline material, is the foundation of all modern computing. But ancient texts describe certain stones as awakening when touched by sunlight, a primitive description of photovoltaic properties that we now use in solar panels. One of the most fascinating properties is crystal oscillation. Crystals like quartz vibrate at extremely precise frequencies when electricity is applied. This property is so reliable that crystal oscillators form the basis of all precision timekeeping in the modern world. Your smartphone, GPS satellites, and the entire internet rely on the consistent vibration of quartz crystals to stay synchronized. Now, here's where science starts overlapping with what ancient civilizations described: crystal entrainment. When a vibrating crystal is placed near another object that can vibrate at multiple frequencies, the second object tends to synchronize with the crystal's vibration. This principle, called resonant entrainment, is well established in physics. What if human bodies, which run on bioelectrical systems, could be influenced? Recent research in quantum biology suggests our bodies may be far more sensitive to quantum effects than previously thought. Studies from institutions like Oxford University and UC Berkeley have found quantum coherence playing a role in photosynthesis, burn navigation, and potentially even in human neural networks. The most stunning example comes from research on magnetite crystals discovered in the human brain in the 1990s. These natural crystals can respond to electromagnetic fields and may form part of a biological system for sensing electromagnetic energy that we don't fully understand yet. Then there's the bizarre world of non-local quantum effects in certain crystals. In 2011, physicists at MIT demonstrated quantum entanglement in macroscopic diamonds at room temperature, showing that quantum effects aren't limited to subatomic particles in near-zero temperatures. This is cutting-edge stuff, but ancient mystery schools described crystals as connecting across space and resonating with distant energies. Were they observing quantum entanglement without the scientific vocabulary to describe it? The Pentagon has actually funded research into using crystals for quantum communications, precisely because certain crystalline structures can maintain quantum coherence, potentially allowing for unhackable communication systems based on quantum entanglement. What's particularly fascinating is how certain crystals interact with human electromagnetic fields. We now know through magnetoencephalography that the human brain produces a measurable electromagnetic field. Research at HeartMath Institute has shown that the heart produces an electromagnetic field 5,000 times stronger than the brain's field. When specific crystals are brought near these human energy fields, measurable interactions occur. Crystal structures can both amplify and organize electromagnetic patterns, potentially explaining why ancient healers placed specific crystals at particular points on the body. But perhaps the most revolutionary understanding comes from Marcel Vogel, a research scientist at IBM who held 32 patents in luminescence and liquid crystal systems. After retiring from IBM, Vogel conducted experiments showing that quartz crystals can store and transfer information via their molecular structure, similar to how computer memory works, but without electricity. Vogel's work suggested that human intention could actually affect the information stored in crystal structures, a claim that sounds mystical until you understand that intention involves focused electromagnetic brain activity, and crystals respond to electromagnetic fields. But is any of this actually applicable to real life? Or are we just finding interesting correlations? Let's look at how this science translates to practical applications, both ancient and modern. So we've got these amazing properties in crystals, but the million-dollar question is, can they actually do anything useful for us as humans? Let's separate fact from fiction and explore applications that have real evidence behind them. First, let's talk technology, because this is where crystal properties are undeniable. Every smartphone contains about 40 different crystalline materials, from the quartz oscillator that keeps time to the sapphire camera lens cover. Without crystals, modern tech simply wouldn't exist. But what about those more controversial applications, like healing and consciousness effects? This is where things get interesting. Medical science has already embraced certain crystal applications. Ultrasound machines use piezoelectric crystals to generate sound waves that image the inside of your body. That's not alternative medicine. That's standard hospital equipment. Surgical lasers use ruby crystals to create precisely focused light beams for cutting tissue. Infrared pain relief devices use crystalline structures to produce specific wavelengths that penetrate tissue and reduce inflammation. These are FDA-approved medical devices, not fringe treatments. But what about placing crystals directly on the body? The practice that's most associated with New Age crystal healing. Here's where we need to be careful but open-minded. Research from the University of Milan showed that certain crystals placed on skin create measurable changes in local blood circulation. The study used thermal imaging to detect temperature changes when specific crystals were applied to acupuncture points. Interestingly, these changes didn't occur with look-alike glass replicas. Something about the crystalline structure itself was creating the effect. This might explain why ancient healing traditions worldwide place such emphasis on which specific crystals were used for which conditions. They weren't just choosing by color or beauty. They were selecting for particular energetic properties. Dr. Richard Gerber's research on vibrational medicine suggests that crystals may act as transducers, converting one type of energy to another. In his model, crystals can transform subtle energy imbalances in the body's field into more organized patterns. While controversial, his work is cited in peer-reviewed medical journals exploring biofield science. What's particularly fascinating is how modern therapeutic practices are rediscovering applications that match ancient descriptions. Crystal singing bowls, for instance, produce specific frequencies that affect brain wave patterns measurable on EEG. These same frequencies were described in ancient Tibetan healing texts as harmonizing consciousness. But the most intriguing applications may involve consciousness itself. Marcel Vogel's later research at IBM focused on how quartz crystals could store information imprinted through human intention. While this sounds mystical, it's mechanistically similar to how piezoelectric materials respond to pressure by generating electromagnetic fields. Our brains produce electromagnetic fields when we focus intention. Could these fields be interacting with crystal structures? The Global Consciousness Project at Princeton University has been monitoring networks of crystal-based random number generators since 1998, finding statistically significant coherence during major global events like 9/11. Their research suggests that consciousness itself may interact with crystalline structures in measurable ways. This might explain the ancient practice of using crystals for meditation and consciousness expansion. If crystals can maintain coherent energy states, placing them near the highly electromagnetic human brain during meditation might support more organized neural activity. The Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, DARPA, has actually funded research into crystal-based technologies for enhancing human cognitive performance. While the research remains classified, patent applications suggest they're exploring how certain crystalline structures can interact with human biofields to support enhanced mental function. For those interested in practical applications, here are evidence-based ways to work with crystals. For stress reduction, clear quartz crystal has been shown in laboratory settings to organize chaotic electromagnetic fields. Keeping a piece near electronic devices may help reduce electromagnetic stress, an increasingly recognized health issue. For sleep improvement, small-scale clinical studies show that amethyst, which emits natural far-infrared radiation, can increase parasympathetic nervous system activity associated with relaxation. Placing amethyst near your bedside may support deeper sleep patterns. For focus and concentration, silicon dioxide crystals like clear quartz can help maintain consistent electromagnetic fields. Some preliminary research suggests that having clear quartz in your workspace may support mental clarity by stabilizing your brain's electromagnetic environment. For pain management, crystals with piezoelectric properties may support the body's natural bioelectric pain control systems. Research from China has shown that certain crystals applied along meridian lines can affect pain perception in ways similar to acupuncture. But let's be real, crystals aren't magic cure-alls. They don't replace medical treatment. They don't cure cancer, and most consumer-level crystal products come with wildly exaggerated claims. The most responsible approach is to understand crystals as subtle environmental tools that may support your body's natural processes, not as miracle workers. Think of them as potential biofield tuning forks, not pharmaceutical replacements. What's particularly interesting is how the most evidence-based crystal applications align precisely with how ancient civilizations used these same stones thousands of years ago. Maybe they weren't just making things up after all, but perhaps the biggest takeaway is this. the line between ancient wisdom and cutting-edge science gets blurrier every year. As quantum biology and biofield science advance, mechanisms that could explain traditional crystal practices are finally emerging. So, where does this leave us? Are crystals underestimated tools for health and consciousness, or overhyped new age trinkets? The truth, as usual, lies somewhere in the middle. We're standing at a fascinating crossroads where ancient knowledge and cutting-edge science are the field of quantum biology is exploding right now. Just 15 years ago, the idea that quantum effects could operate in warm, wet biological systems was considered impossible. Today, it's an established scientific fact. Researchers at institutions like MIT and Cambridge University are discovering quantum coherence in everything from plant photosynthesis to bird navigation to human neural networks. This quantum revolution opens entirely new ways to understand how crystals might interact with living systems. If our bodies utilize quantum effects, which we now know they do, then the quantum properties of crystalline structures become immediately relevant to human biology. Serious scientific exploration is already underway. The University of Arizona's Center for Consciousness Studies is investigating how certain crystals might affect quantum coherence in biological systems. Their preliminary findings suggest that specific crystal formations can maintain quantum states that would normally collapse in complex environments. The U.S. military doesn't typically waste money on pseudoscience. Yet DARPA has ongoing research programs studying crystal-based technologies for enhancing human performance and information processing. Their interest alone suggests there's something substantive behind the ancient claims. Several medical research teams are exploring crystalline structures for drug delivery systems that respond to the body's electromagnetic field, activating only in specific tissue environments. This precision targeting approach mirrors ancient descriptions of crystals that awakened only in the presence of specific conditions. But perhaps most exciting is the emerging field of biofield science. After decades of being dismissed, the study of the human electromagnetic field is gaining legitimate scientific attention. The NIH now funds research into biofield interactions, and several major universities have established centers dedicated to this work. As biofield science advances, we're developing better instrumentation to measure subtle energy interactions. New devices like superconducting quantum interference devices, SQUIDs, can detect extremely faint magnetic fields, including those produced by crystals and living organisms. These tools may finally allow us to quantify what ancient healers could only describe qualitatively. So what should we make of all this as modern, rational people? Here's my take. The most balanced approach is neither uncritical acceptance nor cynical dismissal. Crystal properties exist on a spectrum, from the scientifically established, like piezoelectricity, to the promising but early-stage research, like biofield effects, to the truly speculative, like interdimensional communication. Just because healing crystals get marketed with exaggerated claims doesn't mean the underlying properties aren't real. And just because some properties are scientifically verified doesn't mean every ancient claim about crystals is accurate. If you're interested in exploring crystals yourself, here are 3 evidence-based principles to guide you. First, focus on applications with established mechanisms. Crystals for electromagnetic organization, frequency stability, and subtle energy coherence have more scientific support than claims about specific healing properties. Second, approach with healthy skepticism but genuine openness. Set aside both the new age tendency to attribute magical powers to crystals and the materialist reflex to dismiss subtle effects entirely. Third, combine ancient wisdom with modern knowledge. The most promising applications integrate traditional techniques with contemporary understanding of physics, biology, and consciousness. Remember that science itself is evolving. What seems impossible under one scientific paradigm often becomes standard knowledge in the next. Continental drift was ridiculed for decades before becoming basic geology. Bacterial causes of ulcers were dismissed until winning a Nobel Prize. Quantum entanglement was called spooky action at a distance by Einstein himself before becoming the foundation of quantum computing. The history of science teaches us that we should be humble about dismissing phenomena simply because we don't yet understand the mechanism. The ancient world recognized profound properties in crystals that we're only beginning to rediscover through advanced technology. What if those ancient civilizations, with their thousands of years of observational experience, recognized real patterns of crystal-human interaction that our instruments are only now becoming sensitive enough to measure? At the Hidden Academy, we're not asking you to abandon critical thinking or embrace pseudoscience. Quite the opposite. We're inviting you to apply genuine scientific curiosity to phenomena that mainstream science has often been too quick to dismiss. The true power of crystals likely lies neither in the exaggerated claims of crystal shops, nor in the reductionist dismissals of hardline skeptics. It exists in that fascinating borderland where ancient wisdom and emerging science meet, where the electromagnetic properties of precision-structured matter interact with the bioelectric nature of human consciousness. As we continue to develop more sensitive instruments and more sophisticated models of consciousness, the true relationship between crystals and human biology may finally be understood in terms that both ancient shamans and modern physicists would recognize as valid. Until then, perhaps the wisest approach is to maintain that most scientific of attitudes: open-minded skepticism, genuine curiosity, and the willingness to follow evidence wherever it leads, even when it challenges our existing paradigms. After all, history suggests that today's fringe observations often become tomorrow's scientific foundations. And when it comes to the mysterious properties of crystals, we may have only just begun to scratch the surface. If you found this exploration valuable, please hit that subscribe button to join us at the Hidden Academy for more journeys into the intersection of ancient wisdom and cutting-edge discovery. Until next time, keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep your mind open to the extraordinary possibilities that exist in our remarkable universe. Before we end today's exploration, let's cover some practical aspect for those of you interested in exploring crystal properties firsthand. I've created a supplementary guide that covers responsible crystal selection, testing methods, and recommended resources for deeper study. Selecting quality crystals. Not all crystal specimens are created equal. If you're interested in exploring crystal properties beyond simple decoration, here are key factors to consider. 1. Natural versus synthetic. Natural crystals contain trace elements and growth patterns created over thousands or millions of years. While lab-grown crystals can be beautiful and perfect-looking, they lack the complex energetic history of natural formations. For technological applications, synthetic crystals offer precision. For biofield applications, natural crystals generally perform better. 2. Crystal structure integrity. Examine crystals in person when possible. Look for clear specimens without significant fractures, unless working specifically with included crystals. High-quality specimens have well-formed faces and axes that follow sacred geometric principles. 3. Sourcing ethics. Unfortunately, crystal mining can involve exploitative practices and environmental damage. Responsible suppliers provide origin information and ethical sourcing guarantees. Companies like Crystal Allies, Chakra Palace, and Energy Muse have established ethical supply chains worth supporting. 4. Frequency exposure. Interestingly, research suggests crystals stored near strong EMF sources, like power stations or heavy electronics, can have their molecular structures subtly altered. When possible, select specimens that haven't been stored near high electromagnetic environments. Simple tests anyone can perform. If you're curious about crystal properties but maintain healthy skepticism, here's some simple, evidence-based tests you can perform at home. 1. The pendulum test. This measures the subtle electromagnetic properties of crystals. Take a neutral pendulum, wood or glass bob on a non-metallic string. Hold it stationary 1 to 2 inches above different crystals and observe if particular specimens generate consistent circular or linear movements. This basic test demonstrates electromagnetic field interactions. 2. The sensory isolation test. to separate suggestion effect from actual crystal properties. Have someone place different crystals in your hand while you're blindfolded. Note your sensations without knowing which crystal you're holding. Many people consistently detect differences between quartz, amethyst, and tourmaline even without visual cues. 3. The plant growth experiment. Place identical plants in identical conditions, but position different crystals in the soil of each pot. Document growth patterns over 30 days. Research from agricultural institutes in Japan has shown statistically significant differences in growth rates between plants exposed to different crystalline materials. For the water structure test, place clean water in glass containers with different crystals for 24 hours. Then freeze samples on clean plates. Examine the crystallization patterns formed. Dr. Masaru Emoto's work, while controversial, has been partially validated for serious researchers. If you're interested in exploring crystal properties from a more technical perspective, these resources provide solid scientific grounding. 1. The Properties of Natural and Synthetic Quartz by Dr. Lisa Randall. A comprehensive examination of quartz properties from both materials science and biofield perspectives. 2. IBM Technical Journal Archives. Marcel Vogel's original research papers on liquid crystal properties and information storage remain available through IBM's Technical Journal Archives. 3. Institute of Noetic Sciences Research Library. IONS maintains an extensive database of peer-reviewed research on crystal consciousness interactions, including replication studies of key experiments. For the Biofield Research Network, this consortium of scientists studying electromagnetic aspects of living systems regularly publishes on crystal biofield interactions. Common misunderstandings. As we close, let's address a few common misunderstandings about crystal properties. 1. The charging misconception. Many sources suggest crystals need to be charged in moonlight or sunlight. While certain crystals do interact with light and electromagnetic radiation, the concept of charging crystals is a misunderstanding of how their properties actually work. Crystals don't store and deplete energy like batteries. 2. The one crystal fits all problem. Different crystals have vastly different properties. Using rose quartz for every situation is like using the same pharmaceutical for every medical condition. Specificity matters. 3. The placebo confusion. When critics dismiss crystal effects as just placebo, they're misunderstanding both crystal properties and the placebo effect itself. Placebo responses are real neurobiological phenomena, not imaginary effects. Additionally, many crystal properties, like piezoelectricity, function regardless of belief. For the ancient equals primitive assumption. Perhaps the most damaging misunderstanding is assuming ancient knowledge systems were primitive or superstitious by default. As we've seen throughout this exploration, many ancient observations about crystal properties have been validated by modern science, just using different terminology and frameworks. The journey into understanding crystal properties is ultimately about bridging worlds, connecting ancient wisdom with contemporary research, balancing healthy skepticism with genuine openness to discovery. Whether you're approaching crystals from scientific curiosity, spiritual exploration, or simple appreciation of natural beauty, I hope this video has provided valuable context and practical guidance for your own investigations. As always at the Hidden Academy, our goal isn't to tell you what to believe, but to provide the information, context, and practical tools for you to explore and discover truth for yourself. Thank you for joining me today. If you enjoyed this exploration, please support our work by liking, subscribing, and sharing with others who might appreciate this balanced approach to understanding our remarkable world. Until next time, stay curious and keep questioning.